This video is sponsored by the Ark Echoes of Arcadia Light RP. So in at number 10 we have got the Gacha, and this creature, I will admit, is somewhat good. Just my personal opinion on it is just pretty mid in all aspects. I don't really hate this creature and I don't really love this creature whatsoever. It does have a use, it's not completely useless. It has been slightly nerfed since release, which kind of makes it a lot less useful than what it once was. But still, this creature does have a reasonably nice, like, you could kind of say in a way unique use, which, you know, does fit well in the theme of extinction, and I do think it's a nice creature. I wouldn't remove it from the game. Doesn't really need any kind of TLC or anything like that. It's pretty much just the mid of the mid, really. You're not really, it doesn't need to be better, but it doesn't need to be worse either. It's just where it is. Next up, we've got the Quetzal, and although I really do like this creature for its immense weight and the platform saddle, it really does make it a nice, neat creature. This thing really just doesn't fit in with all those newer creatures coming out, and it just seems like a bit of a slow ordeal, and it is a little bit of a slog to tame unless you have a net launcher, especially solo, because these things are an absolute pain to tame solo, and they're just a little bit outdated, which is what kind of makes them mid. If this was in 2016, it would not be on this list whatsoever. This thing would be like right at the top. It was such a cool creature back then, and I still really do have some respect for this creature. It's just really, for me, I find this creature just to be heavily mid because it's quite outdated for today's Ark use. I don't know what you think. Comment your thoughts down below on the Quetzal, actually, as I think it's a debatable one. Some of you just seem to hate it and some of you seem to really like it, whereas for me, I'm kind of quite mid on it. Now, as I stated earlier, this video is sponsored by the Ark Echoes of Arcadia Light RP, and I'm really thankful for them reaching out for me. But I want to tell you why this is the best Ark server out there. It is the most immersive RP server by far. I love all of the time that I've spent with it, and so far I've thoroughly enjoyed all the playthrough, and that is due to daily and weekly large events. So you get an event daily, but you get a weekly large event. On top of that, there's 9 GB of DLC full conversion, which just adds a whole new way to play. There's a fresh wipe at the moment as well, so if you want to get started, you really can do well. There's over 60 mods, over 75 new creatures, there's all the DLC creatures there, it's on the center. You are going to have the best time on this map. And there's even 12 unique base classes. And with a server like this, with 100% uptime, there's really nothing that can go wrong. So scan the QR code on screen, or there'll be a link in the description to join the server right away. Next up, we've got the Chalico, and this creature kind of just has to be here for me. And I think this one kind of could do with some TLC. As we get closer and further onto the list, they could do with some TLC or nerfing, actually, I might add. Well, the creature in at number 1, I would say its downfall is that it's too overpowered. Probably going to be a really unpopular opinion, but stick around to the end to see if you agree with that thought or not, and feel free to leave your suggestions down below for that creature. But either way, when talking about the Chalico, I think this creature, it has an interesting taming method, but once tamed, it doesn't do anything all too useful, which is a little bit sad. Yes, you can definitely get some use out of it and have some fun with it, and really utilize this creature. If you force yourself to utilize it, you would be able to do everything that you need to do with this creature that this creature can do. I don't really know all too much about this creature, as I haven't spent too much time with it, but from other people's opinions, I've made a guess that it's quite a mid creature, really, and you may really love this creature, and you may also really hate this creature, and you may also just have no real judged opinion on it. But personally, I'm just going to say it's quite a mid creature, and I have pretty neutral feelings on it, although its tame method is really funny, and if I had a TLC, I may even consider taming one. Next up, we've got the plura, and although it does have quite a heavy PvP use, in the PvE space, it doesn't really get used, so I'm balancing it out, and I'm putting it as a mid Ark tame, and although its use is still pretty useful, it doesn't do anything else apart from that one thing, which I think objectively makes it quite a mid creature, as it isn't particularly versatile by any means whatsoever. It just breaks any kind of structure, and that's all it does. It breaks things, and that's its only use. You wouldn't really use it for anything else. You wouldn't use it for a travel mount. You wouldn't use it to gather metal and resources like that, and you just wouldn't use it for that. And especially in the PvE space, I am quite heavily PvE minded and PvE biased, this creature really does not get used whatsoever. But I do admit in the PvP space it is one which is useful. Again, I'm not saying these creatures are supposedly bad, just when you think of it overall, they're pretty mid. There are some much better creatures out there, but also there are some much worse creatures, and you know, there is always a place in a PvP scenario where you'll want to use an Arthur Plura. For PvE, maybe not so much. Next up, we've got the Raptor, and when I kind of think of mid creatures, this kind of balances out almost at the middle for me, as I can agree it's a really great creature for starting off in your single player life. But then after that, they don't really become too useful, and creatures like the Deinonychus are just much more useful and versatile, and you can go out and get something like a Kano or an Aloe, which is going to do you a lot better, and you really kind of just outgrow this creature. And although yes, it's not really intended to be a late game creature, I'm not completely talking about that, it's just its span of use is so short, and there's not too much you can get done with a Raptor that you can't at the same time get done with some other creatures out there, which personally I think are better options. And I'm not again saying the Raptor is a terrible tame. I don't want to say that it's just like it's not deserving of being tamed. I definitely think it is worthy of being tamed, and it does have a place. It's just, again, very mid to me. I'm going to reiterate this a lot. Sorry if that bores you heavily, but I just really want to clarify a point here. And personally, I think this thing's weight would need to be better to warrant it being more useful. It also could do with a little bit like more stamina, and also its health could be a little bit higher, which the Deinonychus all has. And the Deinonychus is kind of like the Raptor, and it's just like infinitely better, which really does put a much better, it deserves a better spot in the terms of just generally ranked art creatures that would be pretty much near the top. That one is, it's insanely OP, but still the Raptor does deserve a place. I just think there are some better alternatives to creatures which you can use instead. If you do go for the Raptor, it's not going to be the worst decision, but maybe not the best either. Here at number 5, we've got the Mosa, and I feel like this creature is in huge need of TLC, and I really do need to say this because the Mosa is one of those creatures where, yeah, you'll probably use it for an underwater boss fight, but frankly, its model is quite outdated, and it doesn't really do all too much for me. A Megalodon will just do me better, in my opinion. It's just more mobile and all of that, especially with all of these new ocean creatures, albeit with mods in the modding community, but that is accessible to all Ark players out there now, because ASA mods, like, you're getting loads of really cool new ocean creatures, and this thing really doesn't stand up to it. And even just in the general space compared to just the vanilla ocean creatures, I really doesn't think it stands up as much as it should, and it's kind of a little bit of a letdown, and it's just really mid. It's not bad, it's not great, but it definitely could deal with some TLC, and I think it would really shine if it did have that kind of spotlight. Next up, we got the Araga, and this creature's kind of purely here for its taming methods, because its tame method is one of the most difficult, and once you actually got it, it's a little bit disappointing, to be fair. And yes, it is still a useful creature, but still, its tame method really does make this thing just so mid, and for most players, maybe even inaccessible, as you probably don't have 24 hours to tame a creature, because, you know, they're so frustrating and irritating to tame. I don't really want to talk about that tame method. One of the most horrible experiences of my Ark life, and probably loads of other people's lives as well. You thought the Shadow Man was bad, try taming this thing. That's kind of the only reason why it's here. It is still a good creature, but it's really, really horrendously horrible, difficult taming method puts this thing on the list. In at number 3, we've got the Angler, and although I talk about this creature a lot, and I kind of like this creature, I still have to put it as mid, as its only real use is gathering silica pearls, and again, this creature could really do with some TLC, and it needs it, frankly. It might need a new model redesign, have some nice cool abilities as well. That lore is there on its face, and it doesn't get used for anything. Obviously you can get angler gel from these things if you kill them, but you know, if you're taming one, you're probably not going to kill it. There just really isn't a lot you can do with this creature, and I feel like there's so much potential for it to be a really good, cool underwater tame that I want it to succeed, and I want it to be really cool and inventive, and I kind of wish Wildcard did a lot more with it, because they haven't, and nowadays it's really just a mid creature, which maybe you should tame, maybe you shouldn't tame. It's just, it's mid of the mid, really, so you'll probably want to avoid it more than actually taming it, because it's not going to be extremely useful to you, but I really think this thing did get a TLC, it could be a pretty great Ark creature, which I think many of you would be taming. And at number 2, we've got the Archotric, and I'm kind of purely putting this thing here as it's kind of been outdone ever since Aberration came out, and now this just isn't really useful. With the cinema crops as well, this thing is just so mid, maybe even borderline on just bad and not worth taming. It's definitely on that low end of the mid scale, but I think with some TLC, and if you make it more like the cinema crops but just on the island, it could be a really nice, neat creature, and it would make it so not mid. And that's kind of the reason why I'm putting it on this spot and in it like so high on this list, because it's just such a mid creature. Like, you wouldn't really even consider taming this thing, and it's just, if it had just that basic TLC, this could actually be a quite usable creature, which maybe quite a lot of you would be taming, like taming the cinema crops, but just for the island instead. And in at number 1, we've got the Rhinoganatha, and when I first started making this top 10 list a couple of hours ago, I had to just put this thing at the number 1 spot. I admit, it's a great creature, and there's so many cool uses for it, but it is way too OP for me. I don't enjoy using this creature whatsoever. I just feel like an absolute god, and for some of you, that's going to be a really nice feeling. You feel like you've fully progressed and everything is easy, but I like Ark to kind of be a little bit of a challenge all the way through, and it really isn't when you have the Rhinoganatha, frankly. You tame it, which isn't actually even too difficult a process. I know it's kind of lengthy, but it isn't as horrendous as you might think, unless you want 100% effectiveness, but still, you are getting the immense OP-ness. That's a really dead joke, but, you know, haha, very funny, of this creature. And, you know, I just don't like it, and that's probably just me looking at my old Ark views of me just playing Ark for a while, and I kind of like the grind and the primitiveness, and I know loads of you really like this creature and really enjoy it. And again, I'm not saying it's a bad creature whatsoever. I'm not saying, oh, this creature's just rubbish, or in this case mid, and it just doesn't really have any real use. It does, but it is just so OP in what it can pick up and what it can do. It is really mid for me, because it just becomes a really unappealing tame. And I actually was going to make the top 10 most unappealing creatures list, but I didn't really have the B-roll to facilitate that, and I kind of only thought of this creature really, and maybe a few others, but not enough to make a fully fledged list. So obviously that's where this came, because I kind of do want to express my views of this creature and how I enjoy it, but I really don't in another way. I personally think it should be heavily nerfed, and then I might actually consider using this creature. And obviously it won't be, because that's just the way Ark is progressing now, just a more easy game that's just full of really OP creatures, and it just, for me, it isn't becoming as fun to play anymore as all of these new OP creatures are coming out. And obviously you just avoid taming them, but they are just all over the map as well, and it's just, I don't like it. Maybe even nerf this thing, or give me an option to not have these things spawn on my map, because I just don't really like them, even in the wild and when they're tamed. Just both. I really don't like these creatures. But anyway, that is the end of today's video. What do you think of my Rhinoganatha opinion? Feel free to agree or disagree. As always, comment down below what's the most mid Ark tame to you, and if you didn't agree with this list, put your top 10 in the comments down below, and I'll see you all later.